Welcome to Dobler Talk, a video cast discussing strategy, tactics, cards and card play, decks and deck building for Game of Thrones 2nd Edition. I am your host Dobler because I like to hear myself talk to myself.
And welcome to another episode of Dobler Talk. I hope you enjoyed our new high-tech intro screen brought to you by Kevin Sandman McClure and Nate Charles of Blesser with the music. All right, this week I'm introducing Dobler's rules of setup. All right, from time to time we will have Dobler's rules, which is where I explain some of my personal rules for getting edges in the competitive scene. And today we're going to talk about setup. If you are a longtime player of Thrones, you probably follow most of these rules already, but I hope you will spend the time with us anyways. Rule number 1, during setup, play as many cards as possible. All right, so here we have a sample Lannister opening hand. I look through this hand, and if I'm going to follow Rule 1, play as many cards as possible, I have several options. I can put together a 2, 2, and 2. This is limited, so that doesn't seem best. I obviously want to do something else here. Let's do this then. 4, 2, and 2. That'd be 3 cards. Another option is 4, 2, 2, and 0. Again, both those are limited. One of the rules of the game is that you can only play 1 limited during setup and 1 each round. So if I follow rule number 1, play as many cards as possible, I am choosing these 4 right here instead of the 4, 2, and 2 that I looked at earlier. I could do Tywin and Western Fiefdoms. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But again, rule number 1, play as many cards as possible. And in this case, it would be the 4, 2, 2, and 0 with Moneylender left in hand. Before we move on to the next rules, let me say this. These rules are not 100% hard and fast rules. There will be times when you find exceptions to these rules or when one rule violates the other, but these are the general rules I follow. Rule number 2, spend as much gold as possible. All right, here's another hand. Here's a Baratheon hand, where I'm looking around at this hand, and I'm going to take my 0 Dragonstone Port so I can get as many as possible. And if I wanted to, I could put down all 5 of these cards, 0, 2, 2, 2, and 1. Doesn't seem bad at all, 5 card drop, 7 gold. But I actually have the option of replacing the Faithful with King Robert's Hammer on one of my characters here. I would be able to spend all 8 gold in this scenario. One of the things to keep in mind is that the gold you spend on setup is getting you closer to doing what you want to do in the game. What I'm trying to say is every gold you don't spend is a gold wasted. So in this case, I'm going to actually choose all of these and put the hammer on one of these other 3 characters and go ahead and start with all 8 gold in play. Rule number 3, meter out your limited cards. Well, you can only play 1 limited in setup and 1 each round. And there are times you draw a hand and you look at it and you say, ugh, limited, limited, limited. Wow, 3 limited cards. Ugh, that stinks. And so when you're looking at your options, you can see that you have a 5, 2, and 1. There's 3 cards for 8 gold. Or you could do 5, 2, and 1 of your limited cards. One of my rules is that you do your best to always play a limited card, because if you don't play one during setup, you are still stuck with this glut of 3 limited cards. You want to try and get rid of that glut and slowly meter it out of your hand. So if this was my hand, I would probably choose this right here, Knight of Flowers, Arbor Knight, and the King's Road. That way I only have 2 limiteds left in hand. Next rule. Avoid characters with positive come into play abilities. Combined with Rule 5, attempt to set up characters with negative come into play abilities. If you will refer to a rule book, actually in this case it will be the rules reference guide, and you go look at setup item number 9, you'll read this note. Cards are not considered to have been marshaled, played, put into play, or to have entered play when they are revealed or announced in setup, and card abilities that reference those terms are ignored during this step. Those cards are considered already in play when the game begins. So if I'm looking at this Stark hand and putting together a setup, I see 2 and 2, 4, 5. Okay, I have 3 left. Well, I have 2 characters here that have abilities that reference entering play. Sansa Stark. Sansa Stark enters play knelt, so she has a negative come into play ability. Arya Stark has a reaction. After Arya Stark enters play, place the top card of your deck on her face down as a duplicate. So she has a positive come into play ability. And remember, all of your setup cards are essentially considered already in play. So what's our rule? Avoid cards with positive come into play abilities and attempt to put into play cards with negative. So in this case, during setup, Sansa gets a huge advantage over Arya, and we choose these 4. Rule number 6. Avoid playing a solitary large character. Let's re-reference our Lannister deck we started with. You may have loved this hand because you love Tywin, and you're thinking, even though it's a 2-card flop, I can start the game with Tywin. Bad idea. March to the Wall is a very prevalent plot in the current environment, and it is a plot that forces each player to choose one of their characters and discard it from play. If you start the game with a large, beefy character as your only character, you are just inviting your opponent to play marched. They get rid of their cheap character. You're getting rid of your big, important character. And in this case, you would be left with Western fiefdoms after the flop. Or after the first plot. That is not something I ever want to start the game with. So, rule number 6, avoid playing a large, solitary character as your only character. Now, Rule 7 might seem like it contradicts it, which is know your deck and recognize your opportunity to play high-cost characters. When you have setup and you get your 8 gold, there may not be many other opportunities during the game to count 8 gold during a round. So if you do have a large number of 6 and 7 cost characters in your deck, you need to be aware of that during setup. You may have to choose a lesser hand in terms of card quantity in order to make sure you play your high cost character that you may not have many other opportunities to play. I'm not saying you should play a character as the solo character, which would clearly violate rule number 6, but I am saying know your deck. Sometimes you want to get out that big character as long as you have a couple others with it during your setup. Rule number 8. Don't be afraid to put key positive attachments on chump characters. Let's re-reference this Baratheon deck we looked at earlier. Now, I had chosen these 5 cards, and what that would have meant is putting King Robert's Hammer on one of these characters that, in my opinion, are all fairly chumpy. They probably aren't going to hang around long in the game. Well, in this case, I don't mind putting that card on them because even if that character dies, that card is going to come back to my hand. So don't be afraid to put a key positive attachments on one of your chumpy characters. And then rule 9, don't mulligan an average hand. I know. Many of you are saying, I want the God drop. I want to be able to set up 7 cards. Well, let me tell you, number 1, those 6 and 7 card setups don't happen very often. Number 2, what does seem to happen more often is that 1 or 2 card flop that just absolutely kills the game for you. So looking at my hand here, it's really only a 3 card setup. Let's say I choose Waymar Royce, and I choose Amon, and I choose Samwell. 3 cards, 8 gold. Maybe not what I want to see. I normally want to see some income or, maybe just a few more cards. I love the 4 and 5 card setups. But in this case, what I don't want to risk is mulliganing this hand into something that's even worse. And I'm just going to tell you right now, the advantage gained from going to a 3 or 4 card flop is generally much smaller in absolute value than the advantage lost if you mulligan into a 1 or 2 card setup. So rule number 9, don't mulligan an average hand. So this was Dobler's rules of setup. Thank you for joining us. Look forward to it next time.